Welcome back to the Darius Gant Show. I'm your host, Darius Gant, as well as founder and CEO of Tesoro AI, where we help innovative companies build and scale AI solutions and AI teams. On this podcast, we focus on cutting-edge technology, more specifically, artificial intelligence. By getting up close and personal with innovative founders, we get front row seats to exactly what problems are being solved by artificial intelligence, both in the real world and business. And we get an inside look into how they're building these emerging technologies. In this episode, we sit with Nikunj Mehta, who is the founder and CEO of a company by the name of Falkonry. Falkonry leverages artificial intelligence to create operational improvements in industries like mining, automotives, and oil and gas. So when you think about the changes that Falkonry is making, the improvements that Falkonry is making, think about things like uptime, yield, and quality and safety. Falkonry was selected in 2019 by CB Insights as one of the top AI startups to look out for. Nikunj will dive into some of the tactics he used as a founder who's bootstrapping a business to compete against well-funded startups and enterprises with a large budget. If you or your team is considering an AI solution, be sure to reach out to the team at Tesoro AI. We've assembled the top talent in data science and machine learning. So whether we're talking about AI strategy, data labeling, custom software development, or staff augmentation, we got a strong team here that has your back. So head over to www.tesoroai.com. All right, folks, without further ado, let's head over and listen to Nikunj. All right, Nikunj, great to have you on the show. One of the things I noticed when I look you guys up is most people, when they name their company, it's kind of like pull something out of the sky, right? Or do something that just sounds good. But you were somehow able to create some connection between artificial intelligence and falconry. I would love to hear about how you were able to, how you came up with the actual name for the business and what's the deeper meaning behind that?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, I also pulled it out of the sky.
Okay.
Falconry, falcons are the starting point for the name itself. In my mind, names have to mean something. Names have to remind us about something. And it was just that frame of mind I was in when the company was about to get started. And for me, I had to think about what is it that matters to people in this space. And the one thing that I knew people care for is speed and force, or just the power, as well as acuity, being able to see from a distance, something that most people would just miss. And when I thought about these factors, at first was just speed and then just sharpness. And I realized I was describing an actual living being. It's called a falcon. Mm-hmm. And then it started to dawn on me that there is this whole trade, if you might, or art of falconry, where expert falconers train a wild beast that's a falcon to do their bidding. Now, of course, falcon is a wild beast, so you can only get away with it for so long. Eventually, that thing is going to find that it is a beast and would want to do what you want it to do. But while you're doing that, the falcon will do awesome things for you. It's actually a well-known fact that a falcon can pull down a deer. Just imagine how small, from a weight perspective, a falcon is going to be and how big a deer is going to be. And so that asymmetry of power is also very, very interesting. So this is what was in my mind when I was thinking about it. And then I realized that AI is very much the same kind of a beast as a falcon. You can go out and buy a great GPU chip from NVIDIA. It's a wild beast. It doesn't really know what you want it to do. Mm-hmm. But it's only in the hands of a falconer that GPU is going to do something useful. And you'll have to train it. And for that, you as a falconer will have to take pains to understand what this beast understands and how do you get it to do what you want it to do. Well, in many respects, what I was about to do with falconry was create a place just like that. Falconry is a place where operational experts teach a beast, which is the falconry computer, what it cares for, and or what the expert cares for. And once the beast learns that, and it's very, very fast at that, it can keep doing that without getting tired. Mm-hmm. It can do that like it's nobody's business. And it can do that in every possible direction. So to us, falconry was a very relevant name, and it has ever since resonated with the people who I speak with, because I think falcons and sort of nature and the force or the power of nature does ring or resonate with them.
Very interesting background there. And even as we start to apply what you all are doing in AI into the manufacturing industry, I saw that you also spent some time at C3 IoT with C3 AI now went public, but curious, at what point did you decide, hey, look, it might be time for me to launch my own company? I see a specific problem that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I've always been a startup kind of guy, almost a year out of college. Call me nonconformist, call me maverick, what have you. I've been at many startups. And when I was at Oracle, at that time, I was doing something very interesting about new data types. And one thing I learned from my time at Oracle is that new data types create new economies. And I had been working on data types like text and human created data, whether it's images or videos, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I was trying to figure out where is there enterprise value in a new type of data. I didn't quite know the answer, but I realized that this whole clean tech space and manufacturing probably had something like that. But more interestingly, manufacturing was a space that I had some roots in. My parents, or rather my dad and my grandfather, both spent their entire careers in the steel industry. Mm-hmm. And there was a little bit of an allure. Plus, I figured that manufacturing probably doesn't get as much love from software companies. It's not a make quick buck kind of a place. And that's the type of person who I am. So I'm not going to try and make a fast buck there. And so I came to C3 with the intention that I want to learn about this space and understand where there is an opportunity and create a company of my own. So I had already thought about that in 2009 before I came to C3. And it just so happened that at C3, I realized there were two major problems in the space. One was dealing with supply chain and the business of manufacturing. And the other was dealing with the physics, chemistry, mechanics, and the business of operations. And that second part was particularly hard. And that was something that at that time, it made sense for me to part ways with the company and do on my own. So it led to the creation of Falkonry.
Falkonry, okay. And what is, you gave us some broad insight into the problem that you're solving. Now, how are you actually doing that?
Yeah, so first of all, why are we even doing this, right? Why is that problem relevant? One of the things I realized in the work I was doing at C3 is that the systems that people were using in the manufacturing world were very complex, and the complexity was growing substantially by leaps and bounds. Secondly, the tolerance levels that were acceptable were getting dialed down. You see that in the semiconductor industry, where we are now down to 7 nanometers, and the theoretical limit is 1. And that's an example, but the same happens in plastics, the same happens in medical devices, the same happens in pharmaceutical drugs. I mean, you look everywhere, and the tolerances are reducing. The complexity increase combined with the fact that the talent pool that's going into manufacturing is diminishing both in quantity as well as in motivation, meant that a different resource that was untapped was necessary. And that what people used to understand initially from sound or smell or touch was now going to have to be done by software.
Okay.
And one of the specific examples I saw was where somebody was trying to describe to me a situation through a time plot. And basically, there were many different curves going in that time plot. And this is actually related to a transformer. And what they told me was that it doesn't matter what the instantaneous value is. That instantaneous value does not cause a failure. But what has happened previously and leading up to this value, in combination with the leading up values of the other parameters, could be indicating trouble. But you can't tell if you're not an expert at it.
Right.
And you cannot find that by writing a query or a complex event expression. And that sort of triggered an immediate response that I was faced with a problem that was not well characterized. And because of my background in computer science and the doctorate work, expressiveness and the ability to compute are very interrelated. If you cannot express the problem, you cannot also compute the solution. Right? And so because people were not able to express the problem, I realized the problem was not in the solution, it was in asking the right question.
Okay.
And so I realized that the real problem to be solved was this. When you have lots of industrial data, a lot of it is IoT data, some of it is also video or image data. But when you have a lot of the IoT data, how can you discern patterns from so many sensors that are constantly sampling?
Right.
And of course, you have to do this in a messy world. And if you're able to mine those patterns, then you know something that people did not already know. And that is the epiphany on which Falkonry is built.
Okay.
So we started the company, and soon enough, we were able to figure out a way to fund our research. And I think, Darius, you were saying earlier that a lot of investors were not sure whether AI was a trend that was 20 years too late, because even when I was in my undergrad, I was doing AI. And here we were in the 2010s. Still, there was no sign of AI taking over the world. The same thing applied with the industrial domain as well. Investors, especially in Silicon Valley, were not just skeptic, they practically ruled out any possibility of creating a venture-style business in this space. And I don't blame them for that. I think Silicon Valley is so divorced from the industrial world that they don't understand how to succeed. There are not enough entrepreneurs who have created examples for investors to learn from, because practically they're going to look for patterns. And there's not enough of a pattern here. And so that's why we bootstrapped the business and we built out our technology. And one of the things that was very clear to me from the very beginning was that there are three elements that are very important. First of all, we have to pass the smell test of an industrial engineer. It's a very tough test to pass.
Right.
The second is that we cannot insist that the customer give their data up to us. We have to be willing to give the software up to them and let them judge whether the software is doing something useful or not. And then the third thing was that this has to be done in a long-term sustainable manner, which meant that the industrial engineer has to be able to understand and trust it. Sustainability comes from being trustable. And trust is only possible in AI if you can explain yourself. And back when we started, deep learning systems were not explainable. And in fact, my prior experience with neural networks is that to make sense out of a convolutional system is extremely hard. And so from the very beginning, we said, let's take a different approach. Let's not go at it like Silicon Valley typically go. Throw a lot of compute at it, throw a lot of smart engineers at it, and they will create a black box and everybody just believes it. So instead, we took a signal processing approach. And we said most people in the industrial world understand how signal processing is relevant to their problems. So we're going to take the same approach, but we're going to approach the problem completely differently. Instead of just looking for frequencies, which they always do, we're actually going to look for shapes. And we're going to do that across multiple signals. So we're not looking for a single trend. We're looking for trends across a whole bunch of parameters. And to us, that is what constitutes a pattern. And so that's the complete linkage from the insight to what is at the heart of Falkonry's innovation.
Okay, interesting. And so you mentioned bootstrapping, you mentioned this, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but there was this chicken and egg problem with the data, right? They're not just going to hand you over data and say, create something for us. We trust you with our internal data. But then you still, your ML algorithms, you need to train them on data. What was your approach to that? How do you guys think about getting that initial data so that you can at least begin making a prediction for them?
Well, there's always beg, borrow, and steal. We tried not to do any stealing, but we had to do both begging and borrowing. We borrowed from some well-known locations. One of them is the NASA simulator for a turbofan, which is a turbine essentially. And it's a great simulator. We use that extensively in the first 3 years of our life. We also came across the UC Irvine ML repository, which has a lot of data sets, quite a few of which are of a time series nature. And human activity is a high quality data set that also has very accurate labels. So we began with either simulation where we could inject an issue, or with very high quality data sets like human activity. And I think there is no amount of emphasis I can place on the fact that if you cannot start with a data set you understand, then there is no hope of solving the industrial data problem, or rather the industrial AI problem. And because we started from those two, we were able to develop confidence that our method works.
Right.
But yet we did not have any practical validation in the industrial world. But what we were able to do was invite small companies, a lot of them were startups, to try our software on their own without telling us what the problem was, without telling us what their business was, and just seeing whether or not the technology was able to find something interesting in their problems.
Mm-hmm.
And because we couldn't learn anything from it, we just had to support the customer and confirm that they found the software doing something valuable. That's all we could see. And so we did that until we started finding that there was commercial interest in what we were doing. It was begging and borrowing, literally.
Yeah. Interesting. So you made an interesting point earlier about when it comes to solving a problem, if you can't explain the problem, you can't solve the problem. You can't get to the ultimate pain point, right? And that makes me think a lot of times about when you're training algorithms, you need to identify the features that are the most important. And so how did you all approach? I mean, did you have subject matter experts within your own internal team? Was this something you were able to pair yourselves with kind of a data partner or a client in order to understand what data is important in order for us to deliver accurate predictions, valuable predictions?
Yeah. I mean, this is probably a $64,000 question. So I hope all of your audience is going to send you a check for that. So
you heard him.
Yeah, but the answer is surprisingly simple here. Look, there are two kinds of companies that you can create. One is that which has a lot of deep vertical domain expertise, and the other that is just extremely good at software and math. To me, doing both together is essentially the holy grail. But if you can do the latter and learn the domain along the way, that is the best Silicon Valley can obtain. And I have seen many examples of that. Okay, so we wanted to go with the second approach. Then secondly, I mentioned the deep learning and neural network approaches. The one thing I loved about them is you did not need to know which particular pieces of data matter. My original experience in neural processing comes from facial feature recognition in 96, 97. That was my undergraduate thesis work. And so I knew that the network has to figure out what matters. And so we entered Falkonry with the same type of expectation that at a high level, if I'm looking for facial features, I've got to have pictures of people, right? Front facing, side facing, well lit, poorly lit, child, adult, it doesn't matter. As long as there are people's faces somewhere in there, those pictures are relevant. And so somebody had to distill down and say, these things don't have human beings in them, and these ones do. And that's what we were going to ask our customers to do, is you decide which problems you want to solve, what data do you collect about it, and just use that data. The features are the physical quantities you think matter, and therefore you are sensing or otherwise digitizing. To us, that was a feature. Now, one of the issues I see with a lot of contemporary work in this space is they try to come up with a shorter list of features that matter. And there are plenty of examples, but a few that come to my mind are things like a kurtosis or a skew or a frequency power, things of that kind, where there is some superstition almost, and I use the word jokingly here, I know people have real reasons for it, that there are certain special features that you should always use in industrial AI. And our belief is not that. We use techniques that transform, but do so in a pure mathematical way, without regard to a very specific type of feature like that. And as long as the information content, while lossy, is a comprehensive map, we believe that the resulting transformation will contain all the features that matter and then some. And then the real trick lies in removing features that don't matter. And you don't ask a user, does this feature matter to you? Because The other thing we've learned in this space is that those who understand the domain and the problem have no time to acquire data science skills.
Right.
So they don't have the time to babysit a feature list and exclude things that don't matter. In fact, to them, the test of intelligence is I will know it when I see it. If you show something to me that does not look intelligent, it's not intelligent. But I'm not going to tell you what intelligence means and then I'll give you a spec sheet and you implement. That's not how it works in the industrial world.
Yeah.
So what happens is that out of a list of a few thousand features, an end user is going to judge based on the insight you give them. Mm-hmm. And that insight in the case of Falconry is we say, hey, in this period of time, in this set of parameters, we have found a behavior that requires your attention that you've never seen before. Can you look at it? And can you tell us, what do you call it? And also tell us whether you care for it. And of course, for your own benefit, write down why that happened and what you're going to do about it. Mm-hmm. When you're working at that level of intelligence, that industrial engineer is captivated because this is the first time a machine is telling them, this is all I want you to look at. It's 98% less noisy than the other techniques they're used to.
Right.
And because it is less noisy, they believe that this is doing something that I could not have done otherwise. And that's how you drive engagement. The second thing is that rather than putting that industrial engineer or the domain expert in the front of this AI project, or if you might, the agile flow, you put them at the end. And by doing that, you have given them the freedom to do what they do. And you've taken on a lot of the risk to give them something useful and interesting at the end of that flow. If you were wrong, you would burn out very quickly. So that automatically weeds out those approaches that don't work.
Yeah, I'm interested if you had, were there any learning lessons that you took away where maybe you guys got it wrong at first? Because a lot of this stuff, some things are experimental, some things have a longer history of these products being built. And I'm curious whether there were whether it's data labeling, whether it was training models, anything along the ML pipeline where you said, here's one thing we wish we could have done better, or if I could advise myself back at the beginning, I would do this differently.
That's another $64,000 question, Darius. Yes, there was something we learned. What we learned was that there is no company that has high quality ground truth when it comes to industrial operations. And therefore, traditional AI fails because traditional AI is built on the expectation that there is high quality ground truth. Mm-hmm. And for example, if you think about marketing, right, there is some way of knowing whether the user eventually clicked on what you showed them, or whether they eventually bought, or they gave you a certain rating. When you have none of that ground truth, what will you optimize for? That becomes the first question. The second thing we learned was that when it comes to predicting behavior, if you are not predicting in the real time, there's no way to validate your prediction. There's no business acceptable justification that the prediction is working. It doesn't matter what you do in a lab. It doesn't matter what you do offline. It doesn't matter what you do with historical data, because at the end of the day, the value produced is zero. Especially when it comes to prediction.
Right.
So you can create the best ROC curve. And when you go to the finance manager, the check they will write is for $0. Because it never created value in practice. Right. And so that was a second lesson. And so we had to very quickly adjust our go-to-market as well as our product packaging so that the software would be used by industrial engineers in real time. And they could see whether this thing was intelligent. And they could act on what it was finding and judge whether it was valuable. And we could see whether or not this was engaging its users and creating sort of a positive feedback loop.
Right.
So the only way to test that prediction process is by real engagement.
And like what you're referring to is a kind of a lot of that. Well, it's process, but it's also messaging in your go-to-market. Yes. As you have these conversations, what are some of the, because it comes down to value at the end of the day, but what are some of the value metrics that you speak to where people can tangibly say, all right, well, we could see us using this software if you can actually deliver XYZ?
Yes, ultimately it does come down to ROI or payback or internal rate of return, whichever way you want to think about it. I think customers are getting attuned to asking their vendors, including in AI, for a 12-month payback period, and especially in the industrial world, even though people don't change jobs as quickly in the industrial world than they do elsewhere. That's a reality. That's a pretty demanding ask if I was starting out today. The way that the ROI is measured is usually in two ways. One, did I get any saves from my use of this approach? And generally, the save has to be at least a 5-figure amount, ideally a 6-figure amount. Is anything less than that, I would say that it disappears into noise. It doesn't matter.
And by save, it could be something like you prevented a system downtime.
You prevented a downtime. You ended up not producing defective product and then sitting on whole pile of it.
Okay.
It could also mean that you did not leak or emit pollutants and therefore were slapped by regulators, right? So these are a variety of such forms. The other one is you found something in the intelligence domain, because Falkonry is used both in the industrial world and in the intelligence world. You found something that would have escaped detection, and that is now an opportunity. So it's the exact opposite.
Okay. Yeah.
So yes, in either of these cases, people look at what, and by the way, I think the industrial buyer is quite discerning, but is also willing to lend you a little bit of rope, because what they'll look for is, what has it found? Would it require a lot of intelligence to find it? And if it can do this problem well, there are X number of other problems that I could also do well. And so I'm willing to meet it somewhere halfway through. And by the way, the other advantage that we have created for ourselves is we've lowered the entry cost for our customers. Mm. So the payback period being 12 months it is possible to achieve that. And it is not easy to do that because a lot of AI is expensive and requires a lot of handcrafting and data scientists and expensive people. So it cannot be achieved by everybody, but I think that is a key success factor.
And what you're saying is cost of entry is the cost of them leveraging in cognitive solution.
And proving to themselves that they can create enough ROI. See, ideally, you want the 12-month payback cycle such that in 6 months, they create enough value that they can spend the next 6 months justifying to their management how they need to double down, right? Mm-hmm. And they would say that I'm doubling down from the savings I made in this year itself. So you're not making any additional investment. I'm simply recycling my gains and I'm expanding. That's the best form of expansion. It's essentially a perpetual machine, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. And it's interesting that 12-month period seems to be pretty important and probably derives from the fact that folks are working on a fiscal year, calendar year, right? So look, at the end of the year, however long, what's our ROI? That's just the way corporate is trained up. So if you have a champion on the client side and it's going to take you 2 years to deliver ROI, that person's going to be less likely to stick their neck out. But if you are able to deliver in less than 12 months, they can, whenever the board meeting happens, whenever the conversations with the executives who ultimately need to sign off on these things, they can have some tangible, look, this is what we did, and here's why we should invest even more into innovation.
Exactly.
And did you start this with a co-founder? What was the original team? How did that look?
Yeah, some quirks of fate, I suppose. I did start it by myself. I'm the sole founder. And at the time, I knew that this was a tricky area to dive into. And I did not want to do this in any way that took credit away from my previous employer. And naturally, there's always a little bit of a question as to how other people have taken work that they've done for their previous employer and then try to create a new company and who owns that intellectual property. We've seen plenty of cases in Silicon Valley, right? So I did not start with a co-founder, and I did not start with a customer either. We had to really think our way through it. Over the first year or so, I was joined by a couple of people who I had gone to college with, one in undergrad and another in grad school, one younger than me and another much older than me, who also were very interested in AI and who had some interest in the industrial world. And so they became my founding team. And we eventually decided to part ways, but they've become successful in their own rights in other places. So yeah, there's quite a bit of founding engineering team, people who've been with the company over 7.5 years, but I'm the only founder.
Yeah, it's interesting how it all lifting up a startup is difficult if it's just traditional tech, and we're talking about cutting edge tech.
Yep.
So you add some additional complexity into that, it makes things interesting. I guess outside of the original co-founding team, when you brought on some other folks, who were the first key players that you were like, look,
yeah,
these are the pieces.
So I look for two key players. One was somebody who understood the math that was necessary to get a good start. Mm-hmm. And a second person that I needed, or that I thought we needed, was somebody who understands how to create a product as opposed to a framework or a consulting business. And that's how I had originally conceived of that founding team. Naturally, we also needed some terrific engineers who were good at software and the math. In fact, we used to have a T-shirt back then which said that Falconry is a place where the math and then parenthetically software is harder. So the math for us was harder than the software. Naturally, times have changed since. But we also brought on a very good engineer friend of mine, Nick Pritchard, who is our senior product manager, as an engineer originally, and background in aerospace engineering from UCLA and Georgia Tech. Worked a little bit at Lockheed Martin and understood physical systems. And he was our first analytics engineer. And so we decided to design or shape the team after the hardest problems that we needed to understand.
It sounds like you were able to pull in talent from your network. Now then, as you all scaled, did you go to recruiters? Did you continue to pull from your network? Did you recruit internationally? How did you all scale up the team?
Yeah, we actually scaled up internationally from our beginning. If you remember, I said earlier, we knew that we had to be sustainable because there was no big sugar daddy. Nobody was going to write a big check to me. I'm not a wealthy person either. So there was no other alternative but to find access into talent pools that were affordable to us. And so for the first 4 years of our life, we used to be roughly equal sized team in the US and in India. Mm-hmm. And I am from Mumbai, and I decided that I was going to build the initial team in Mumbai since I just knew that place better. And so that's how we have built up the team. One question you asked about recruiters. Again, I have nothing against recruiters, but all of the hiring we've done in our product team, save for perhaps one person, was done either by using LinkedIn and reaching out to candidates myself, or through my network and through the network of Dan Kearns, who is our CTO, or through our website and people applying online. Of course, we often have had students from USC, which is where I studied, come to Falconry. We've had advisors who have guided their mentees to apply to Falconry. So it's been all mostly organic, done by word of mouth.
Okay. Do you feel that's scalable for you? Now that you have a better brand today, it's not like, hey, look, we're hoping to get this thing off the ground. But in terms of just like, and not just in the AI segment, but as you think about front end, back end, and
Yep.
even in sales, does that, at what point do you say, all right, we're going to have to try another strategy if that's necessary?
Sure. Well, I would never say never. And we have, in fact, used a recruiter in India to help us out there.
Yeah.
We don't hire a ton of people. We've been quite efficient. We don't need a lot of salespeople. And in fact, I think sales hiring, sales coaching, sales training, all is expensive. So we are just resolved now to not rush into doing that. But yes, we understand the value that recruiters provide. In fact, my biggest challenge right now is to hire a dozen or so engineers. So I'm going to have to figure out, again, beg, borrow, or steal.
There you go. And for you, though, is that done? Will that be done in India and you continue to scale up both sides, or,
Yeah, I think we will scale it up. And even today, we are roughly half and half. We are about 50 people now,
Yeah.
but we are still roughly half and half. I think we will continue to grow it like that, which is not the typical thesis of companies that are India, US. A lot of times such companies have almost nobody in the US. But we feel that this approach has worked better for us.
Yeah. What I've seen, and let me know if this is the case for you guys, but what I've seen has been for the folks that this works for, where they have a team that's not necessarily based where maybe the executive team is, there's some level of leadership, whether that be this is if it's in a different time zone, right? Because now we're all working virtual, but there's some level of leadership that can guide the folks who are on the other side of the pond. Is that how you all work today?
It's a good question. I think as a company, we tend to have better outcomes when we groom our leaders, when we coach them, mentor them, grow them. And that is also closer to my personal style. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we've done with our team in India. So in fact, all of our marketing is done out of India, which is very, very unusual. I don't think anybody would even dream to start that way. On the other hand, we have engineering that is split between the US and India. And so we've basically approached it by taking a little bit additional effort to work together, collaborate, find natural leaders, groom them, and support they grow. And then over time, I think their experience kicks in. And by that point in time, there is really no difference in motivation. But I see that we will continue to grow. So what happens in the future remains to be seen.
Hey, yeah. Even when I was working in investing, it's like, look, the number one thing is we need to find good people, not just people, but we need to find good people. So I'm always interested in how people actually approach that, and everyone has their own.
Yeah, one thing that I have learned, not the hard way, but in a way that I will always remember, is that motivation trumps everything else. So I've always sought people who are motivated, and my connection with them as a founder is strong, and that they draw their motivation from me as the leader of this team. Not because it's about personal loyalty, but because that's the only commodity I have that is unique to me, is how much I can motivate another person. And that has helped. And I believe that in general, in a company like ours, and in a field that is quite challenging, if you don't find motivated people, there are plenty of reasons to say, you know what, I'm going to duck out. So
yeah. And along those lines, I'm going to take us in another direction here, but we talk about motivation and even inspiration, right? I'm curious for you, whether we're talking AI or business in general, who's someone who's been motivational or inspirational for you?
Well, I say Tom Siebel has been inspirational to me. Tom Siebel is the CEO and chairman of C3.ai. I also worked at Siebel Systems many years ago. And I see him as somebody who is a terrific blend of technical skills and sales or business acumen. And it has, even from a distance, served as a terrific North Star. And the other person I look up to is Mark Benioff, also a USC grad, Trojan, like myself. And that is because I feel that he has been able to create an organization that does not suffer from so many of the ills that many startups get mired in. Salesforce never had that challenge. And because Mark has been dedicated to his mission for 3 decades, and there are very few people who can do that. And we can see that when you are dedicated for so long, how much of an impact you can have. So those two people I certainly look up to in within the space that I'm aspiring in.
Okay. And last question here. What's been your favorite tech tool to use in the organization?
Well, I love Slack. And maybe this is also my personality. I like to have as much information as I can.
Okay.
And my team knows this very well. One, I don't forget easily. And two, I do not miss reading something or following up on something. And so Slack has been extremely valuable for that reason, because I can keep up with people without having to ask them to write status reports. And I think in today's day and age, a CEO does need to have 2 or 3 levels down details about what is going on in the company. And without something like Slack, it's just not possible.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing a lot in regards to tools are like, especially today, are tools that make communication easier in various forms. And perhaps that's because I'm primarily talking with founders, folks who are on executive level, but yes, communication tools are the big hit these days.
Yeah, you can make me work hard by reading and consuming everything that is getting written. That's on me. But at least I cannot complain that I did not know, or that people did not tell me, or I could not make sense out of all of the information I was getting, right? All those 3 things are a failure of leadership.
Yeah.
So I have to eliminate the possibility that I can fail as a leader. Of course, I'll have other issues, mistakes, shortcomings, but I know that it wouldn't be one of these. These, I think, can debilitate an organization.
Helpful insights here. Throughout the entire interview, podcast, whatever you want to call it, but I appreciate you taking time to sit down. I know you've been in meetings all day today. Hopefully you get a chance to take a breather here, but this has been super helpful, and definitely want to keep up with your progress. Where can we find you?
Yeah, so there are 3 different places where you should look for me. One is the Falkonry blog, and we've learned that it's our responsibility to share what we are learning with the broader audience, because there are many mistakes being made and many paths being taken that are suboptimal. So we are trying to share where we see paths proving to have less friction. The second place where you can follow me is on LinkedIn. While I don't write LinkedIn articles as much, but I do share what we write. I put in my perspective. That's where you will find the people I trust the most, or who I respect the most. And a third place, which is increasingly common now, is Clubhouse. We have been conducting a lot of fireside chats with thought leaders in the spaces like Industry 4.0. And it's a terrific forum, just like today. Gives us an opportunity to have a conversation, an intelligent conversation, where there is nothing prepped. You can only participate in it if you truly are a thought leader. And I've been hosting a lot of people there as well. So Clubhouse, LinkedIn, and Falconry blog.
All right, folks, there you have it. Sounds like there's some additional opportunities to learn more about AI in manufacturing, more about Falconry. Thanks again, Nikunj. And again, we'll definitely have to keep up to date with how you guys are progressing.
Sounds great. Thanks, Darius. It was really good to get the opportunity to talk to your listeners, and I look forward to connecting again.
Absolutely.